Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, a third runway at Heathrow was first given the green light by Gordon Brown's government in 2009. The idea was actually floated in 1968. Anyway, almost 8 years on from that '09 decision, could Theresa May be about finally to allow Heathrow expansion to go ahead? Could she surprise everyone back Gatwick instead? Maybe she'll come out in favour of both of them. A decision's expected imminently, but it's not straightforward for the Prime Minister. Several members of her cabinet are opposed to any plan to expand Heathrow. Reports suggest as many as 60 of her backbenchers are ready to vote against it. Our reporter, Mark LaBelle, has been looking at Mrs May's options.
A growing number of people want to take more flights, and some accuse the government of dragging their feet over allowing that to happen. All the while, our airports are operating flat out.
All right, after you.
So this is fully autonomous. You just have to press the start button there and we're off.
Matthew Hill is from a business-backed group campaigning for more airport capacity.
We haven't had a full-length runway in London South East since the Second World War. Gatwick was built in the 1930s, Heathrow in the 1940s, and we need one. Heathrow is full. Gatwick will be full in the next few years.
Matthew's group claims the lack of a new runway is costing us a potential £1 million an hour.
I think there are huge economic benefits from the construction of a new runway. At the moment, because we don't have that new runway, we don't have that new capacity for new flights to new markets, we're missing out on £9.5 billion a year in lost trade. And until we get that decision and we get that runway built, we'll continue to lose out on that trade.
One airport that's eager to expand is Heathrow, either by extending this northern runway, the one closest to us here, or the Airport Commission's favoured proposal, building a new runway parallel to these, about 1 kilometre that way, in place of a field and some villages. It's said that would offer 40 new destinations from the airport, carry lots more air freight, provide 70,000 new jobs and an overall boost to economic activity in the country, with a promise of no night flights, new environmental and community controls, and no fourth runway.
Heathrow's hub status also services many of the UK's other airports, including this one in Newcastle. On average, every year, 250,000 passengers travel to and from this key exporting region via Heathrow, often on sales trips.
Well, we've been very strong supporters of a third runway at Heathrow. We think it's in the best interests of the North East. We also think it's in the best interests of UK PLC. It is the UK's only hub. Our services connect to many, many destinations across the world and allow businesses to trade right the way across the globe.
Gatwick Airport also wants to expand with another runway here.
By doubling Gatwick's capacity, the plan would create 22,000 new jobs, a vastly expanded short-haul network and more long-haul destinations.
I think the expansion of Gatwick will bring, firstly, the certainty of delivery. We can have spades in the ground in this Parliament and we can be operational the next. So that's within 10 years we can have a new runway, and Gatwick can provide the increase in capacity at a price which is actually half the cost of Heathrow.
Now, before anyone gets carried away, there are of course some people who would far prefer no extra planes in the sky.
We already fly more than everybody else. Most of these are leisure flights. Well, who is taking these leisure flights? Actually, 70% of all of our flights are taken by 15% of the population. Now, it's a wealthy, frequent flying elite.
No buts, no third runway.
But with approval of a third runway looking likely, could more protests be on the horizon?
You know, I can tell you now they're dusting off the handcuffs, they're dusting off the banners. And, you have to remember Heathrow, if they choose to expand Heathrow, you're talking about hundreds of homes being bulldozed, whole communities being eradicated, wiped off the map. Now, over the last few years, since the last big protest around Heathrow, the relationship between local people around the airport and grassroots climate change activists has only got closer, and those guys are going to get together and just cause merry hell for the people trying to expand the airport.
So what happens next? The Prime Minister, Theresa May, who once called for a better, not bigger Heathrow whilst in opposition, will chair a select group of Cabinet colleagues expected to decide imminently on whether to build a new runway and where. It will then take months for a national policy statement outlining the new works to get drawn up before MPs get to vote on it, leaving plenty of time for any further opposition to airport expansion to get off the ground.
Mark Lebel reporting. I've been joined by two Conservative MPs. Adam Afriyie, he's opposed to Heathrow expansion. His constituency, Windsor, is pretty close to Heathrow Airport, and Kwasi Kwarteng, he's in favour. Welcome to you both.
Good morning.
Adam Afriyie, let me come to you first. The independent Davis report into runway expansion said the case for Heathrow was clear and unanimous in the Commission. 180,000 more jobs, over £200 billion in economic benefits. So why are you putting the narrow interests of your constituency before the national interest?
Well, let me be clear first of all. I will fight tooth and nail for the interests of my constituents. But the wonderful thing about the binary choice between Gatwick or Heathrow is actually it's not in the national or the regional nor actually consumers' interest to expand Heathrow. So actually, my two constituencies, if you like, align. But the Davies report has already been largely undermined. There are I can give you 17 reasons why it doesn't work and 17 reasons why it's wrong. I'll just give you just two. Number one, they said that Gatwick would not have 42 million passengers till 2024. This year, they've got 42 million passengers, so they were wrong on that count. In terms of connections to long-haul destinations, Gatwick have increased it to 20 now, and they didn't expect that to happen either. So I think that the Davies review was good in its day, but it also had a very limited remit. It said it was talking about Heathrow as a hub, whereas actually the airline industry has changed.
All right, what do you say to that?
Well, the fact is we've debated this for more than 15 years. The government white paper in 2003, forgive me, the government white paper in 2003 suggested that we should expand Heathrow. £20 million later, 12 years later, Davis came to largely the same conclusion. And I know Adam is doing a great job for his constituents. A lot of my constituents are opposed, but more favour expansion. But we're never going to get any form of progress on this if competing MPs, different MPs, are allowed to frustrate the process. You could have had about 3 people who are Gatwick MPs arguing very passionately against Adam's desire to expand Gatwick. And the point is, we're just in a paralysis. We're having a kind of theological debate that will last decades.
So let me ask you this.
And Heathrow is...
Why Heathrow? Why not expand Gatwick and increase the capacity of our regional airports? I mean, I thought the government strategy was to rebalance the economy more in favour of the North and the Midlands.
Well, increasing Gatwick won't help the North and the Midlands. And if you actually listen to Northern MPs like the man or people representing Northern interests, Scottish interests, they all say they want to increase Heathrow. The SNP have said last week they want Heathrow to be expanded. Your gentleman from Newcastle said exactly the same thing. So if you want to help the economies in those areas, listen to what they're saying. They're saying expand Heathrow.
Well, let me put that point to Adam Afriyie, because 32 regional airports, 32 support the expansion of Heathrow to maintain its position as one of the global hubs. Even the Scottish Government agrees with expanding Heathrow. They all say if we want to be a serious player in aviation, we need a global hub. The global hub is Heathrow.
Well, the interesting thing is there's no argument that Heathrow is one of the UK is the UK hub, and nobody's trying to get rid of that. The question is, if you're adding a single new runway, and that's the binary choice we have today, is it better to add it at Heathrow or Gatwick? And for me, it's just overwhelmingly clear. If you add it at Heathrow, Heathrow is the most expensive airport in the world. If you add another runway at taxpayer expense, but largely as well, then actually you make it even more expensive. So prices of flights go up. So it doesn't help competition. And the second thing is it would also involve at Heathrow, I mean, whether or not Heathrow could ever be delivered is another question. My own borough council is part of a legal action which will try to prevent it. So basically, even if that decision is made, we may not see the capacity. Whereas at Gatwick, I'm going to put it in layman's terms, it's dirt cheap. Gatwick will pay for everything. It can be developed, it can be delivered within 10 years, and there'll be competition.
It's not a global hub airport.
But the point is that the hub that we have at Heathrow is perfectly adequate adequate for the next 10 or 15 years.
It's running at 99% capacity.
Every airline, 90% of the new aircraft being ordered are actually for point-to-point travel. The airlines have decided that the hub capacity is adequate, and they're now moving to a different model. So I think it's in the national interest to go for Gatwick.
Line, though, I don't see any other country giving up its hub status. But let me ask you this. We've not built a major new runway in London and the southeast for 60 years.
I think since 1946.
Yeah,
so that's nearly 70 years.
70 years then, all right. Why not expand Heathrow and Gatwick?
Personally, I would do both, because I think that if we're serious about having international trade, if we're serious about building links to the outside world, especially after Brexit, we have to get serious about aviation. We have to accept that we need more capacity. I think it's frankly scandalous that we haven't managed to expand capacity for 70 years. I mean, if we think of the economic growth that's happened in that time, and we want to grow and we want to expand and build a prosperous economy, it seems slightly bizarre to me that we are reluctant to increase aviation.
Let me just finish on the politics of this. Do you expect, whatever the decision, do you think there'll be a free vote on this?
I actually think this is one area, I think we'll agree on this. This is one area where I think that the government does need to take a lead, and I hope they'll make the rational choice for Gatwick, because I think that
But if the government comes out for Heathrow, will you defy the whips on that issue?
100% yes. I'm going to
So
fight
you don't
tooth
think
and
there
nail.
should be a free vote?
No, I'm very happy for there to be a free vote, but I'm saying that I will always vote against Heathrow because it doesn't make economic sense.
So the reports this morning of about 60-odd Tory MPs are unhappy about the prospect of Heathrow. Does that figure strike a chord with you?
I would hope that it would be more, but it really depends on the political positioning of Labour, the SNP. I would very much hope the government decides conclusively for Gatwick in this binary choice.
You've said that.
I think my good friend's Adam, he's doing what he feels is the best for his constituents, Zach Goldsmith. I think 60 is way off the mark.
Too many?
I think it's way too many. I don't know which reporter or which journalist suggested that 60 Tory MPs.
Sunday Telegraph this morning.
Well, I don't know who's responsible for that. My sense in the House of Commons is that there are probably about 20.
Free vote?
20 hardcore people. I think it may well be a free vote. I agree with Adam that it's generally
If there's 20 hardcore or so, you probably need Labour votes to get this through, won't you?
I was on the Transport Committee for 3 years, and there were Labour MPs who were very keenly supportive of Heathrow.
All right, we'll leave it there. We thought the decision was coming this week, but we now learn it may be delayed again. I mean, after 70 years, what's another week or a month here or there?
Thanks very much.
Let's start with the value of the pound dipping to its lowest record lowest level on record amid fears among currency traders and investors that the UK is heading for a so-called hard Brexit. How does this all affect Londoners? How does it affect your constituents, Jim Fitzpatrick? Are you picking up anything yet?
Not so far, but of course all the stories saying that everything's going to cost more, all of our imports are going to cost 10% more, and the counter-argument saying it's good for exports and it's good for manufacturing. There's not a lot of that in my constituency, so I think ordinary people are going to have to be paying more for their food and more for their normal purchases. So in that case, it will be disappointing for them.
Bob Neal, are you getting sort of worrying warning signs from the ground up from your constituency about some early signals here?
Well, I think people are a bit concerned about the potential increase in food prices in particular, because that's an issue, as we know, because we import so much. But from my point of view, I'm worried too that it's an indication of lack of confidence in the currency as a whole. And in my constituency, the biggest single employers are people in financial services, a lot of them in the city and elsewhere, as it is in a lot of London. And I'm particularly concerned that the wrong sort of Brexit would do really serious damage to what's the key sector of our economy and my constituents.
And then there's some early signals that this could start to have an impact on inflation, and then if wages don't keep, in line with that, you have cost of living declining suddenly.
Well, that's not what we want to see, and I don't think that's what people voted for at the time of the referendum. That's why it's right, and I'm glad that we're going to have some proper parliamentary scrutiny as to what the negotiation process is. I think we've got to have that, because at the end of it, we respect the outcome, but I want an outcome which keeps London and Londoners prosperous and successful.
OK, let's move on. A decision on airport expansion is imminent, but what impact could Brexit have on aviation? Some low-cost airlines, in particular, are worried about the uncertainty, as Andrew Cryan reports.
Once upon a time, British skies were dominated by British Airlines. But then, with membership of the EU, came the single market, and any European airline was allowed to use any airport in the UK. And suddenly, you could fly Alitalia to Iran, or use the Irish-owned Ryanair to go, well, pretty much anywhere in Europe.
I think very few people realise that the EU produced tremendous benefits for aviation and passengers and air travellers. As a result of liberalisation, we've had an explosion of people because they can travel to many more destinations throughout Europe, and they can do it cheaply. Whether they fly on low cost or traditional airlines, the fares have gone down, and millions of people are now travelling to places they want to go to, which 15 years ago wouldn't have been possible.
But with the decision to leave the European Union, all of that is now up in the air. There's enormous uncertainty about how in just a little over 2 years' time, nobody really knows which airlines will be able to fly to and from London and to which places. And that uncertainty has got some people very worried. That includes CityJet, an Irish airline who used London as a base to fly all over Europe.
If a consequence of Brexit is that the UK is no longer given access to a single market, and if that comes with the introduction of restrictions on air transportation, it throws up quite a horrible vista. For example, in the case of CityJet, we fly from many European cities into London City Airport. But if we lose our fifth freedom rights as a result of Brexit, we technically will only be allowed to fly from our home base, which is Dublin, into London, but we will be denied flying from other countries that we currently operate out of.
So what does all this mean for London's status as Europe's prime aviation hub?
It's going to have to call it into question because it's going to be very restrictive and therefore begs the question of, looking for increased capacity at Heathrow, the third runway, the sixth terminal and so on. So, suddenly it could become quite a difficult situation where, anticipated growth may not just happen because the growth has been stymied.
It's a potential crisis which CityJet think also calls into questions the finding of the government's Airport Commission, a 3-year study that recommended a third runway at Heathrow. It makes no mention of Brexit, leaving the European Union, and only one passing reference to the single market, and none about leaving it. Critics of the report say it's just one of several omissions.
The truth is, the report is littered with assumptions which you can pull apart. Assumptions around air quality, which Howard Davis no longer tries to defend. Assumptions about where the economy is going to be in a few years' time. None of it taking into account the possibility that Brexit might have happened, which we now know it will happen. But actually the aviation model, irrespective of Brexit, is changing. There are fewer transfer passengers now than there were 10 years ago. Their business journeys are going down because of better technology. People choose to go point to point. And those are the arguments for a hub that Heathrow wants to be.
One of the Remain camp's big set pieces before the referendum was when politicians of all stripes joined forces with Ryanair to highlight the risks of Brexit on aviation. These warnings may yet prove to be just scare stories. We might well strike a deal with the EU that means everything carries on much as it is. But there's also a chance that it might not.
Let's talk to Daniel Moylan, former aviation advisor to the previous mayor, Boris Johnson, who now advises Gatwick's largest shareholder, and Nick Faraday from the Aviation Environment Federation. Welcome to you both. Daniel Moylan, what do you expect? Do you think Brexit spells difficulty for the long-term aviation future?
I think that the key thing is what you just said about long-term. We're talking about a runway being built in London, which will be open in 2025 to 2030. 2030 if it's Heathrow, probably. And I think it's a mug's game, actually, today to try and predict how many people will be travelling in which direction to which destinations 15 years or so down the road. I think there is a strong case for saying demand for aviation is going to rise, and not just in this country, but you have to remember around the world, countries like India and China, as more and more people are achieving the sorts of incomes which allow them to fly for the first time, and they're going to want to come here as on holiday, and they're going to want to come here for business. So I think the demand will be there, and the case for another runway is really very strong. The question is about where it ought to be and what the right location is in response to Brexit, and that's a different question altogether.
And Heathrow, of course, say it's Heathrow.
They say it's Heathrow, but I think if you look at it this way, what Brexit is actually saying to us is that we need a clear commitment to something that can be delivered and can be delivered reasonably soon. And the problem with Heathrow, it is going to be one of the largest private sector projects ever done. It's of immense complexity in engineering terms. It's practically unfinanceable. It's £18 billion and no plan shown to us yet as to how to finance it. They don't have a solution as to how the runway is going to cross the M25. How does the airplane cross the road? They haven't got a solution to that. And the risks, therefore, of Heathrow actually not happening or happening late and over budget are extremely high. Gatwick is a simpler proposition, I think it's fair to say, and one that can be delivered earlier.
Do you think there are genuine worries, concerns, short and medium term, about the impact on, say, low-cost operators if we are not going to be able to retain the same kind of access to the single aviation market in Europe? Are we going to be able to retain that same access?
Well, two parts. First of all, yes, it is significant, whether we're part of it or not. It has significant effects. The second thing is, I'm pretty confident that we could negotiate a deal. Switzerland, which decided not to join the European Union, has negotiated a perfectly satisfactory deal with the European Union, and I'm sure we could do the same. So I'm not actually that worried about it, but of course if I owned an airline, I'd probably be more worried about it than I am in my personal capacity as a flyer, but I think it can be solved. I'm confident that that's something that with goodwill the government will be able to negotiate.
Nick Faraday, where do you stand on this? Do you have fears for the airline sector? Do you think it will curtail, as some people believe, the sort of immediate post-Brexit period, curtail the numbers that actually want to fly?
I'm not fearful because I don't think the changes are likely to be that great either way, or whatever form of Brexit we adopt. But I think most people would expect a slight fall in the amount of air traffic, or rather not an absolute fall, but a reduction in growth.
Why?
And
Just why, though? Yes, why do you think?
Well, the aviation industry report, IATA, does suggest there'd be 3 to 5% less air traffic by 2020. That is two things. It's firstly a forecast, which is highly debatable, admittedly, that the economy will not grow as fast, but also a forecast that that the pound would plummet, which has come about. And those two together, it's not just one, it's both of them, lead to their forecast that the amount of air traffic will go down. Now that's obviously quite significant because although most people might not realise it, the economic case for Heathrow is very weak at the moment for a third runway. Now if there is less growth, the case is weaker still, and really all the Davis recommendations are up in the air, or at least the timing that a new runway would be required would go way back. Because the fact of the matter is, of course, that there's masses of spare capacity in airports all around the country.
So then one could take that argument and say, well, in which case, by the time an expanded Heathrow is ready, aviation demand, if we listen to Daniel as well, will have recovered, if you like. The world after Brexit will have settled down.
Well, it won't actually, because the Airports Commission, who's really the only people who've done detailed studies on the aviation industry in this country, and they're reasonably independent, they showed that if you don't build a third runway at Heathrow, it actually makes very little difference to traffic, even at 2030, which was the point at which they chose. And as I said, the reason is, well, it's twofold. Firstly, all the essential traffic just simply goes to all the other airports that have got masses of capacity. So it's hard to see how the country's economically damaged because you can't fly from Heathrow to some Chinese city, but you can fly from Birmingham or Stansted or Edinburgh or Manchester. So there is no great need, even under current forecasts, even at 2030. And I think very few people would say Brexit is going to make our economy and demand for air travel grow faster, even if they don't think it'll slow it down.
So, well, Jim Fitzpatrick, but we are where we are, aren't we, with all the signals, and you're somebody, well, you were a transport minister when the last decision was made by the last Labour government to go ahead, and then we saw what happened. You haven't changed your mind?
No, not at all. And in fact, what's really interesting is that what happened was the Conservatives went into the 2010 election with a manifesto against the expansion of Heathrow because they think it would win them a clutch of seats in West London, which it didn't. We then had 18 months of tarry, and then we had 3 years of the Aviation Commission. We're 6 years later, and what we've got is the Conservative government saying, actually, yes, the Davis Commission is recommending Heathrow. Nick and I are obviously looking at different reports because Heathrow's at 99% capacity. There is huge demand there at the moment, not just externally and from other countries who want to fly into Heathrow, but from the regions, from Northern Ireland, from Scotland, north of England and the West Country, want to get access to Heathrow to be able to make the international connection. So I think the government have wasted 6 years, and hopefully very soon we will get a decision, and I think it was a false prospect to put Gatwick against Heathrow. The private sector operators, they should both have been allowed to go ahead and build new runways.
Bob Neal, I think the last time we had you here, you were saying obviously you were favouring Gatwick, weren't you? Do you accept you can see which way it appears to be going, we believe. George Osborne's been tweeting this week too. He says, you know, Heathrow's the only option. We knew that, didn't we? We knew he thought that, but still.
Well, if it is that decision, I think it will be a mistake and I won't be able to support it. My view is that I entirely agree with Daniel's analysis. I think Gatwick is the right answer because it's deliverable in the short term. Also, I think Nick's got a point that really Heathrow, as a major expansion, may well be a solution to yesterday's problem because the game has moved on. I'd rather deliver Gatwick quickly. We do have spare capacity at Stansted. We've had an expansion now announced, I'm glad to see, at City Airport. Much better, for example, to improve the linkages between the existing airports. Much cheaper to do that. If, for example, government takes on board the Crossrail 2 Growth Commission report that Daniel and I were both involved in, then you could easily put a spur from that line up through the Lee Valley up to Stansted and get very quick connections.
Surely also argue that the arguments for Heathrow, now this sort of different plan, different runway, we've got HS2, high-speed rail planned, we have a spur planned, we have Crossrail in place, surely the arguments are stronger for this, you know, both of you, have a go.
A runway that you might, if you're lucky, get in 2027 at a cost of £18 billion. I mean, you have to work astonishingly hard to spend £18 billion on 3 kilometres of tarmac and a large shed, which is really all they actually have to build. And this is going to be an engineering project full of risks, financial risks and construction risks, moving the M25 or building a bridge over it or something like that.
How do you overcome those? Are you happy to take those risks?
I think the investment has to be made. Heathrow has many, many more international long-haul connections than Gatwick has at the moment. Gatwick's in single figures. Heathrow is over 40. We need to, post-Brexit, make the connections with the new and emerging markets. Heathrow is very much the hub airport that people want to fly into from the rest of the world on business or on tourism, and where people within the United Kingdom want to fly to make those connections. This is our decision, which is 25 years late. We clutched the straw in 2008 and said we must build. 10 years almost later, we're still waiting for a decision from this government.
Brief last words, Nick Faraday. If the decision is to go ahead with Heathrow, do you think it will happen this time, or do you think it will get bogged down with all kinds of challenges over air quality and what have you? It can be delivered within air quality limits eventually, can't it?
No, it can't. There's no evidence that it can. The government's desperately trying to prove that with new air pollution studies, but it's shades of last time. When it last came up, the government did a study and they realised it couldn't come in within limits, so they then went and altered all the figures, and that was exposed. There was a panorama programme devoted entirely to the way they fiddled the figures, and one suspects they're probably having to do the same just now.
Bob.
So no, it's probably not deliverable.
OK. Bob, you don't think it's deliverable as well?
No, I don't.
And you've said you wouldn't support it, but if you were honest, if there was a vote across the country of all MPs from all sides at the moment, do you think Theresa May has a majority in support of this if she wants to go ahead with this decision? You accept that, don't you?
I've not done the calculations, and I'll be doing my best to persuade my colleagues from outside London that really this is a false prospectus that they're being sold, because they're not going to get the interconnections in any reasonable time. Better we make sensible use of the slots of the capacity that's available in London as a whole first.
Jim,
very quickly.
Be fair to Jim, but the Airports Commission shows that actually the regional connections are going to fall. Yeah. And Heathrow and a lot of MPs...
He's addressed that. Jim's in fighting form, but he's taking on the three of you. I'm going to spare him any further conflict. No, Daniel and Nick, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Questions over the funding of the Garden Bridge continue. Now, a National Audit Office report has cast doubts over whether the government properly considered the project's value for money. Tanjil Rashid reports.
This is what the Garden Bridge is meant to look like. A new river crossing between Waterloo and Blackfriars, estimated to cost £185 million. Most of that is supposed to be raised privately by the Garden Bridge Trust, but the taxpayer is also footing a total of £60 million, coming from central government and TfL. Now, the National Audit Office has raised questions over how these funds were allocated. Auditors found that advice that the project could represent poor value for money was ignored by ministers. Pressure to proceed with the funding came from the very top, from the then Chancellor George Osborne and the then Prime Minister David Cameron. Losses to the taxpayer could total £22 million if the project is scrapped.
I'm concerned about the lack of a clear business plan for this bridge, that the money that is being spent so far, all the liability rests on taxpayers' shoulders before construction has even started and before private money has actually been firmly committed.
All eyes are now on the Mayor as he decides whether to go ahead and build the Garden Bridge.
The Mayor has got some big decisions to make. He's set up a commission and ultimately it'll be his decision.
Although £37 million have already been spent developing the project, it's now increasingly uncertain whether the Garden Bridge will ever amount to anything more than these CGI graphics.
Bob Newell, do you still go along, want to see this built when civil servants were warning, we're not sure we should pay this money up front, we're not sure this thing's going to be built. We can see they were warning, they were overruled.
I don't want it to go ahead anyway. I think it was a mistake. I think it was one of Boris's less good ideas. I think actually environmentally it would wreck one of the world's great riverscapes around that whole stretch of the river. To break that up with a bridge I think would be absolutely wrong, and I see no justification for it at all.
I think we had Theresa Villas here saying the same thing not long ago. I think I'm trying to begin to tot them up. I'm wondering, are there many who actually do think it should go ahead in London?
Well, I wonder. I don't...
In which case, what should we do you think?
Well, I think we should just pull the plug now. I'm sorry that public money has been wasted on it. I think it's a false prospectus yet again. It was a sort of a bit of a vanity project, hyped by some people. I don't think it's going to do much to help what the really important issues are for people in London about doing business, about making the place attractive. We think of better ways to spend public money.
Why does Sadiq Khan just not, kill it off then?
Well, I think he has to justify backtracking on it if that's what he concludes to do, and I hope that he does. I think it's insulting, not just a vanity project, and I agree with Bob's conclusion. It's insulting to the people of East London. We've been trying to get river crossings in East London for 30 years.
Surely you'd prefer a river crossing in the centre of London with lots of trees and flowers.
We've got the Rotherhithe Bridge to Canary Wharf, the Boomerang Bridge, which is in offer at the moment. We could have that done by 2020. The Silvertown crossing, Sadiq's looking at it.
You wouldn't get private funding for those.
Galleen's Reach is not.
You wouldn't get private funding for those, though, would you?
Galleen's Reach not concluded yet. Half of London's population lives east of Tower Bridge, and we're talking about a garden bridge across the city centre for the tourists. We can't function, as Bob says, in terms of business, in terms of jobs, in terms of employment. 2 crossings east of Tower Bridge, 23 west of Tower Bridge.
And you're not being delivered those crossings by the Labour Mayor, Sadiq Khan, all the crossings you want, are you? So in which case, why doesn't he, at the very least, get rid of this one?
Well,
What's he doing? It's political cowardice?
I think you need to look at the history. The last 2 mayors of London, Ken Livingstone came in. It took us 5 years to persuade him that we needed river crossing in East London. Boris came in. It took us 3 years to persuade him we needed river crossing in East London. At least Sadiq has given a green light to the crossing at Silvertown and said on this one, I'm reviewing it.
You're on the other side of the river, Bob. You accept that, nodding your head. At least he has.
Absolutely. We're in South East London. I think Jim's totally right. That's where we really need the crossings. That's where the growth is. That's where the pressure is. Much better to do that.
OK, let's move on. Now for the rest of the political news in 60 seconds.
London Mayor Sadiq Khan has warned the government that a departure from the single market would be deeply irresponsible.
For if we were to leave the single market without an agreement in place for privileged access for British business, the consequences could be disastrous.
The population of London grew at twice the rate of the UK as a whole between 2011 and 2015 and could reach almost 10 million by the middle of the next decade, official figures show. In mid-2011, the population of the city stood at 8.2 million, but over 4 years it increased by almost 500,000 to just under 8.7 million. The Mayor has published detailed plans to bring in an ultra-low emissions zone in central London a year early in 2019. Mr Khan also launched a consultation to introduce a £10 a day T-charge toxicity levy in central London for the most polluting vehicles from October next year.
Now, the thing is, again, Jim Fitzpatrick, on this ultra-low emission charge, fine to bring it to speed everything up. But what about those people, a lot of constituents you'll have, don't have that much money, businesses, people who can't change their vehicles quickly, an extra £10 for emissions as well as congestion?
Well, I think Sadiq is proposing that it should be phased in over the next few years, but air quality is a huge issue in London. We know that thousands of people are dying prematurely because of it. I've been campaigning with Matthew Pennycook from Greenwich on the cruise terminal which has been built in Greenwich because the developers are not making a shore-to-ship power supply, and the cruise vessels are going to have to be churning their engines 24/7, pumping out diesel fuels into our part of East London, which is already one of the air quality hotspots, for the sake of £1 to £2 million. So there's things that the Mayor can do.
Bob, are you worried, though, about any potential effect here on small business? They're the people that can be hit hardest.
The one worry I've got, I think the principle's a reasonable one to try and achieve, but I'm concerned about the phasing. A lot of people in my constituency will be running SMEs. They'll be delivering up into the central part of London. That is a worry for them. I think maybe we should look at some phasing, possibly some degree of allowances in return for them renewing the vehicles after a period.
Thank you so much, both of you.